One summer moment can change a child's life. Through Toys for Tots Give and Go initiative, your support provides books, games, toys, and outdoor adventures that spark curiosity, creativity, and a love of nature. Whether it's fishing, learning a new sport, reading under a tree, or playing with friends, these moments build confidence and lifelong memories. For too many children, those moments never come. You can help change that this summer. Visit toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots, delivering hope beyond the holidays.
Welcome to a new era of baseball's great spectacle. The T-Mobile Home Run Derby, live on Netflix. The biggest sluggers in baseball put their talents to the test on All-Star Weekend. Raw power meets star power. Big swagger meets bigger slams. And you don't swing to make contact. You swing to make history. Watch the T-Mobile Home Run Derby live on Netflix, Monday, July 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Back to the Stone Zone here in the Roger Stone Show. Joining me now is one of my oldest friends in American politics, Army veteran Michael Caputo. He's a policy consultant and a recent cancer survivor who worked with the Department of Health and Human Services to try to stem and correct the early focus of the MAHA efforts on childhood cancer issues. But during his 40-year career in American politics, he served in positions across Washington, including working for Congressman Jack Kemp, who, let's face it, should be in the Football Hall of Fame. That's where I met him. Later, U.S. government sent him to a decade of international advisory work in Russia and Ukraine. Mike Caputo worked on the re-elections of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. He served in senior advisory positions in Donald Trump's 2016 and his 2024 presidential campaigns, and then later as Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at HHS during the COVID pandemic. My good friend was diagnosed with stress-driven metastatic head and neck cancer in September of 2020, and he, like my wife, who's also a cancer survivor, has survived, as has his family. Michael, it is great to have you on.
Thanks for having me on, Roger.
So one of the things that really aggravates me is that anytime there is an effort to hold those who violated both the law or the Constitution in their manic effort to destroy Donald Trump, to keep him off the ballot, to break him financially, to put him in prison, that's called retaliation and revenge, rather than what I think it is, accountability and justice. You and your family were put through hell by Robert Mueller and his thugs. Fortunately, you survived indictment. I did not. They weren't able to fabricate charges against you, but they certainly tried hard enough. First, I just congratulate you for your survival and for your faith, which I know sustained you. And then to confront cancer, it just shows that God is good, is what it shows. But first of all, tell me how your family's doing and how was your 4th of July?
It was great, Roger. You know, my family and I, we live down in South Florida, a little town called Ave Maria. It's a little Catholic town in the Everglades, about 11,000 Catholics, a beautiful cathedral. And we threw a 250th anniversary party on July 3rd, which was tremendous. Had a lot of fun. We jumped in the car, Roger, 0 dark 30 on July 4th. And me and my girls and I, we drove all the way. We're heading north to Tennessee to have a vacation. But we celebrated July 4th in Perry, Georgia. I don't know if you know that spot, Roger. You probably stopped there on a presidential campaign or another. But it was the hometown of Sam Nunn. What a great July 4th celebration it was. That is a town that loves America and loves its 250th birthday. Perry, Georgia is a great spot.
Well, as you heard earlier in the program, you had your own run-ins with Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen now launching a new radio show. Because I am a good Catholic, I have forgiven Michael Cohen for what I believe were his trespasses against me. And obviously the president appears to have forgiven him as well, which shows what a great man the president is. But he hit the president very hard, calling him a racist and a con man and so on. I have one specific complaint. Michael Cohen testified before both the House and the Senate that he was in Donald Trump's office in July of 2016, days before the Democratic convention, when I called that the secretary put my call on the speakerphone, and I told them that within days, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks would dump a massive amount of emails damaging Hillary Clinton's campaign. Now, there's a couple problems with this. First of all, he testified to that extent in the House, but then he told a different story in the Senate. Suddenly it became not before the Democratic convention, but in front of the Republican convention, a matter of weeks. Secondarily, phone records subpoenaed by Robert Mueller could find no such phone record, and Rona Graff, the secretary who allegedly entered the room to tell Mr. Trump that I was on the phone, has no memory of this happening. I can tell you when it happened. The answer is never. And of course, the dump of emails didn't happen in July. It happened many, many months later in October, which Assange had said in public in numerous forums was going to happen anyway. So it's not like this was some deep, dark secret. I believe that all of that testimony was prompted by prosecutors. None of it was true. Yet to this day, I have no rancor. 7 years ago, I have moved on. I actually wish him well with his new radio show.
Well, Roger, I feel a little differently, I guess. You and I went through this together, the whole Russiagate stuff. You took it harder than I did in our family. We've been through it a bit, but you and Nidia and your family, what a terrible thing you went through. And, the things that happened to each one of us, I call our you and I and others, the remnants of Russiagate, because it's still not over and nothing, there's been no accountability. But, the one thing that's true, Roger, is that people around the president were being pressured to flip and to say things that were not true in order to get the president in trouble. And, I hadn't done anything wrong. You hadn't done anything wrong. But we soon realized it didn't matter if we didn't do anything wrong. They were going to make something up about us. And they needed someone close to the president to parrot those lies. And they found that in Michael Cohen. Roger, you remember, you introduced me to Michael Cohen, I guess 2013. I hadn't met him yet. You introduced me to Donald Trump in 1988. Remember that? In the New Orleans convention, what a time that was. But I went over, you introduced me to Michael Cohen, if you remember, late 2013, early 2014, because I wanted to convince Donald Trump to run for governor. And you said, look, we're going to run him for president in a couple of years, 2016. And I do not want him running for governor in New York State where, good Republicans can't be elected. But he said, if you remember, Roger, you let me pitch it. And you said, Donald Trump's not going to do that. He wants to run for president. And indeed, that's what he ended up doing. But when I was pitching the run for governor, hanging around Trump Tower a lot, I think you remember, Michael Cohen came to me and he said, look, I know Roger's probably going to win in your little debate about whether Donald Trump runs for president or governor. But Michael Cohen said to me, he said, Michael, I'll support your idea of Trump running for governor if you support me for lieutenant governor. My jaw dropped. I couldn't even believe it. This guy who really resembled more of a cartoon character or probably, a character from Goodfellas than somebody who would be a viable lieutenant governor candidate. But that's the kind of guy he was, Roger. It was all about Michael Cohen. And look, you're right. I'm, in my readings this week, I read Matthew where it says unless you forgive as a Christian, God cannot forgive you or may not forgive you. If you don't have forgiveness in you, then you may not be forgiven. But I'm telling you, Roger, I'm having a hard time forgiving Michael Cohen. I really am.
Well, look, I think a couple things. I was opposed to Trump running for governor of New York because I thought the job was too small for him. Secondarily, I recognized his potential as a presidential candidate. That fateful meeting I couldn't attend because I had a detached retina, which I sustained in a boxing match, and therefore I wasn't able to fly. Had I been in the meeting, I would have thrown cold water on the idea. President Trump, then private citizen Trump, entertained it for a couple of weeks before deciding that he'd much rather run for president. Just 2 years later, he did. My good friend Ed Cox, chairman of the New York State Republican Committee, has brought this up with me several times, that he remembers it well, and that I was right, that would have been a mistake, and that running for president, which many people thought was impossible, not probable, not possible, was exactly the right thing to do. So, look, at that point, I had I had 5 presidential campaigns under my belt. I'd worked twice for Richard Nixon, 3 times for Ronald Reagan. I think there might have been a little jealousy there. I think Michael ran for the state assembly and was defeated. I think he ran as a Democrat, as a matter of fact. So I thought that was a factor as well. 2012 was
Roger,
not... Go ahead.
Mike didn't seem to understand how close we were. We are, you and I. And I can tell you, I can vouch for the idea that there was real jealousy there, because by then you had 5 presidentials. It was clear there was going to be a professional campaign to run Donald Trump for president. I really do believe you're right. I think Michael Cohen came to this kind of interaction with a high degree of jealousy.
Well, and the other thing people don't know is that when I was charged, prosecutors got the judge to order that you and I could not speak to each other for an entire year. You were not able to communicate with me in any way, despite the fact that you were not a witness in my case, which was never explained. We asked several times, your lawyers asked several times to have that restriction removed, but they refused. So the idea of denying you the counsel of your best friend in this kind of time of stress gives you some idea of the Soviet-style show trial nature of the proceedings against me. I wasn't allowed to mount any viable defense. Ultimately, we learned, of course, this was 7 years ago. People have forgotten this. But the jury forewoman testified during jury selection and during the trial that she never heard of Roger Stone. She was unfamiliar with the charges against me. Yet we learned after I was convicted that she had been attacking me and Donald Trump by name on both her Twitter feed and her Facebook page, but she had them locked down on a personal setting so that could not be seen during jury selection. On that basis alone, my conviction should have been thrown out and I should have gotten a new trial. Although in the District of Columbia, in front of the same judge, I don't know that we would have had the same result, would not have had the same result. But I was prohibited from introducing evidence in my own defense. It's a horrific nightmare when the federal government, with its extraordinary power, targets you. There's very, very little you can do about it.
I can imagine, Roger. Look, I'm a fan of WABC, and I don't want to second guess any of the folks over there. I respect the leadership, but I don't understand this. To me, I can remember, by the way, during your after you were charged and the run up to your trial, the many things that Michael Cohen said in public and in private that were really adding to the problem and adding to the pain and adding to the lies. But I do remember one time, Roger. I think it's important for the listeners at WABC to understand what the treat they're about in for with their new show that's coming on. I remember I was on CNN and I was defending the president, and one of the commentators said, well, the man closest to him in his office, Michael Cohen, they said something like, he says otherwise. And it was one of those lies that he had told about the president. And I came back with a rather, I think, strong statement against Michael Cohen. And in the car, on the way back from my live interview in studio, I got a call from Michael Cohen, and he was laughing and mocking and joking about how all of us were going to go down with the president, laughing about it on my phone. So, listen, I understand the president is a merciful man. I mean, don't have to look any further than these pardons this week. He gets crap for these pardons whenever he gives them. But Roger, as you know, he's a merciful man, and mercy is a part of leadership, especially in the 250th Jubilee year of the United States of America. We should be celebrating with presidential mercy. So, listen, I respect the president if he has found the room to forgive Michael Cohen for being such a lying, cheating, thieving flipper. If he can forgive him, God bless him. I'm having a bit more trouble. But as you know, Roger, we have to. We really have to. I'm not going to heaven if I don't, And after all the things you and I have been through, to not be able to go to heaven because we're holding a grudge against a small man like Michael Cohen, I'm not going out that way.
All right, Michael, we have to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back into the Stone Zone. We're talking to my good friend, Michael Caputo. Michael, I want to walk through this just for purposes of historical record, and that is the Hank Greenberg affair. During the 2016 campaign, you contacted me and said that you had been contacted by a man calling himself Hank Greenberg, who claimed that he had access to information that was embarrassing to Hillary Clinton. Now, in a presidential campaign, this kind of information comes in over the transom all the time. Some of it's real, some of it's not real, some of it's meaningful, some of it is not. You bugged me relentlessly until I finally had a sit-down with Mr. Greenberg, a sit-down that frankly was so brief that I actually forgot it. I did testify before the House that I'd never met any Russians, although I was never sure that Mr. Greenberg, not his real name, was indeed a Russian. We met in Sunny Isles, Florida for a cup of coffee, and he said that he had access to emails that were embarrassing to Hillary Clinton. And I said, well, I couldn't tell him what the value of those would be until I saw them. And he laughed and said, well, that will cost you $2 million. Then I laughed and said, well, you don't understand. If I had $2 million, that's not how I would spend it. And then he laughed and said, no, it's not your $2 million I want. It's Donald Trump's $2 million. And I said, no, you don't understand. Donald Trump's not paying $2 million for opposition research. Have a nice day. And I left. Only later would we find that Hank Greenberg was not his real name, that he was an FBI informant, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and an informant for 10 years, Roger. First of all, I'm never going to live this down. I've introduced you to some pretty stupid people, but that was probably the worst thing I did. But, both of us forgot it because he was a clown. We couldn't believe that somebody would be such a clown and be an FBI informant. It wasn't until later that I figured out. I hired a private investigator at the advice of my attorney, and we figured out that he'd been a FBI informant for 20 years and had been living in Miami all that time, and he had sued the FBI because they were late on paying him. And in this lawsuit in California, he detailed all of his work for the FBI. Now, when we figured that out, I think that took Henry Greenberg off the table for the FBI. Thankfully, I had a really good a private investigator who figured that out. But I think if we hadn't figured it out, you and I would have been in more trouble than we knew.
Yeah, there's no question. Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell, he's had his own problems, immediately jumped on the fact that we had both forgotten this contact with a quote-unquote Russian. But then, just as quickly as they brought it out, he disappeared. When you go to Mueller's final report, which BuzzFeed had to go to court to get released, it's reduced to one line saying that Henry Greenberg, not his real name, was not an agent of the Russian government. So they buried it very quickly. He was an FBI informant run in on both of us in an effort to catch us in some kind of illicit operation. But you can go to greenbergfiles.com, where you have posted all of the documentation that Mr. Greenberg was an FBI informant sent in to set us up. Welcome to the Mueller witch hunt, the greatest single abuse of power in the history of American politics, the greatest single dirty trick, and one that we have both, thank God, survived. I want to thank my guest, Michael Caputo, for joining us today. Michael, where can folks find you on X, your social media? I guess we lost him there. All right. We will be right back. Thanks for joining us on the Stone Zone, right here on the Roger Stone Show.
Thanks for listening to The Roger Stone Show. You can hear The Roger Stone Show Sunday afternoons at 3. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?